Hi, and welcome to our 9th episode of our WVD Community Podcast. It's time for our bi-weekly episode about everything related to WVD. I'm here together with Patrick Kuhler and of course Neil McLaughlin. And before we will introduce our very special guest, I would like to give a very big shout out to my mate Neil, who has just received his very first WVP award. Big congratulations, Neil.
Thank you, Stefan.
Well done.
Thank you.
Very nice.
Still sinking in. It's only been a day, so my first day as an MVP. So,
it's your
oh no,
it's first day.
Day 2.
So,
yesterday was day 1.
Cool. So let me introduce our guest. He works for Microsoft, lives in Redmond, I think, and he is a fellow Dutch guy. So Pieter, welcome. Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Stefan. And Neil, congratulations with your MVP status. You're a celebrity now.
Thank you very much.
But anyway, thanks guys for having me in the show. I'm Pieter Wigleven, as Stefan mentioned. I work for Microsoft in the WVD product team or product group. And I can explain a bit more about how our teams are structured, but I focus on the OS and all apps, and I'm happy to explain it in more detail, but that's the short summary.
So we will talk about that in this episode, I think. We will definitely. So welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, well, let's get started with so you're a Dutch guy, you live in Redmond. So can you tell us something about how it all started for you and until the point where you're right now in the WVD product manager team?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to explain a bit about my history. So I've been with Microsoft around about 13 years now, out of which 10 years I was based in the Netherlands and 3 now based in Redmond. And throughout the 13 years, I've held many in several roles. I started off as a PFE, which stands for Premier Field Engineer, which was a very interesting role, which allowed me to travel all across EMEA and visit hundreds of large organizations. I then switched to a TSP role, which is a technical pre-sales role for both Intune and Windows 10. And then at some point, I was approached by someone who says, hey, we got this role for you. It's based in Redmond. Would you like to relocate? And so I had a discussion with my wife and, well, the kids as far as you can chat with a 3-year-old. And I relocated to the States, to Redmond as a product marketing manager, which was interesting because I always had technical roles and all of a sudden I was in this marketing group, which sounds very silly to me. But even within marketing, you have technical roles. And I've done that for roughly a year, a little over a year. And then I moved into the engineering space in the WVD group. So the product marketing gig was interesting because that's when I was kind of introduced to the world of virtualization. Like beforehand, I've done stuff. I remember setting up my own RDS environment and, in the way back, I played around with Citrix, but I was mostly doing other things like spending a lot of time thinking about security or just the management of endpoints, and virtualization wasn't something top of mind for me. And then in that product marketing role, at some point I was given the choice and they said, hey, Pieter, what do you want to do? Do you still want to focus at security or you want to work on this new shiny thing, which we think is going to be very big? And I'm like, that sounds interesting. What is it about? They said, well, we don't know yet, but it's something related to virtualization. So that's when I kind of stepped into the world of virtualization. And that thing grew out to be what we now know as WVD. So it was interesting, I first worked on the whole launch, preparing the launch, and I never seen all the work that's involved of just launching a product. I was always on the receiving end where all of a sudden Microsoft announced something. You're like, oh, that sounds interesting. Let's see what it is. Well, guess what? There is like a year of work ahead of an announcement like that. So it was very interesting. And it's more business side related, not so much in terms of technical things. So once we launched WVD, or at least we announced it because the actual launch was followed a little later, that's when I moved to the engineering group. And like mentioned before, that's where I sit now. And I try to make sure that the folks around me, like the brains around me, I'm kind of herding the brains in our team, making sure that we actually build the features that you guys want and the rest of our customers and partners want as well. So I hope that was a bit of an introduction, maybe a little long, but I'm hoping it gives a good idea on what got me here.
It's definitely a good start. So perfect.
So you've been there literally from day one, right?
Yeah. It was interesting. Like engineering was building something, and then at some point they said, "Hey, we're building this really cool thing." Back then it had a different name. As a matter of fact, we've had, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 names before we actually ended up Windows Virtual Desktop. Lots of internal names. That's even a funny thing. I think, Stefan, you will like this. At some point we did a tour. This was back in May 2018. We did a tour across EMEA, or mostly Europe. And we visited a couple of customers to ask them feedback about our plans. You know, you always got to talk to customers to kind of bounce your ideas off. And I want to discuss WVD, but one of the questions we were asking is like, what kind of name would you give this product? And if you already come to the conversation and say, we have this product called WVD, what kind of name would you give it? Like people would say WVD, of course. So we gave it a project name. And there is a process within Microsoft. If you want to get a project name, you go to this website and you click generate, and it spits out like 20 or 30 project names. Yeah, there's actually a website for that. You know, I was amazed by it as well. And they're all legal approved, etc. So I went to this website and I hit generate, and it mostly lists out city names because apparently that's, from a legal perspective, is a safe choice.
It's the safest one, yeah.
Yeah. Apparently it's hard to sue someone if they just use a city name. And the first thing that the tool generated was Eindhoven, which is a city in the Netherlands. I'm like, well, this is meant to be. Yeah. From now on, it's called Project Eindhoven. And it was funny, like the Americans couldn't even pronounce it. They were like, Eindhoven? They struggled with pronouncing the project name, which was even more hilarious to me. So anyway, for a short period of time, well, short, maybe like 6 to 8 months, it was called Project Eindhoven. And,
really?
Yeah, there's still some, if you know where to look, you'll still find the name. Like if you go into the Azure gallery and you download the image, you know, it's some string, you can actually see Eindhoven. It's still tucked away in some places, which makes me happy whenever I see that. So, you know, little background there.
Cool. Peter, what was the funniest name this project generator always gave you? What was the funniest name you ever received from that tool?
I actually just stopped looking at Eindhoven. You know, all the other names weren't relevant to me anymore.
It was the perfect match.
It was the perfect match. Well, I do remember there was a second one, which was Lake something, and it sounded like a new Intel CPU. So, you know, I thought like, that's a horrible idea. Let's just go back to the original Eindhoven.
The Eindhoven.
Yeah. So I don't remember all of the other names because I kind of stopped looking.
There's something within, there's got to be something within Holland, right? Because we've had this discussion on a previous podcast. What is it with Dutch people and virtualization? Because even now the Microsoft names generator is spitting out tools. Dutch.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember when we announced WVD, the product wasn't ready yet. We didn't release the product. So, and whenever you announce, you want to have a call to action, because wait is a horrible call to action. So what we did is we put up a page where you could register to be notified whenever we would hit public preview. And maybe you've seen that page. You know, we took it down after the public preview. But it was interesting to see how many unique organizations registered on that website. And at the end, we had around 13,000 organizations worldwide that wanted to be informed whenever we would announce public preview. And I looked at the data just to see where all the requests were coming from, or which countries those organizations were based in. And number one was the US. Number two was Japan. So apparently virtualization is big in Japan as well. Number three was UK. And then number four, guess which mighty country on this planet was number four? You got it exactly. So the Netherlands was there. So I felt proud again. You know, it's a small country, but apparently it's big on virtualization.
It is, because every time I go to a conference in Europe, it's always the Dutch people who are definitely probably 50% of the attendance. It's all Dutch people. So it's always been an ongoing joke. I don't know why. Nobody seems to know why this is, but
I don't know either. It's a disease or something. I have no idea.
I think in the VDI like a pro survey, we were also like second or third country with the most users.
yeah.
But that's run by Dutch people, so I don't trust that
True.
data.
But the WVD community team is also run by a Dutch guy, so.
I think I know what it may be. I'm just thinking about why logically it could be. So maybe in your school books, you have like a diagram from like a container or something, which looks like what virtualization is, so it's ingrained in your minds.
Yeah, that must be it, definitely.
Yeah.
So you need to have a WVD teacher in primary school.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be nice.
So what kind of growth? I mean, obviously you mentioned you've seen like 13,000 people signed up for the public preview. What kind of growth? Because I've never actually seen any figures. What WVD growth looks like at the moment. Can you kind of share some information about sort of what it currently is worldwide and an increase?
Yeah, I think our business group is kind of reluctant to just share the raw data. So what I can tell you is when we launched WVD, so that was at the end of September last year, we had a specific forecast, like what do we think WVD will hit by the end of our fiscal? And as you might know, we have a bit of a weird fiscal year. So it ends at the end of June and then starts 1st of July. So we just started our new fiscal year, fiscal 21. So we were set, let's say, a bit of a target, like, hey guys, it would be nice if we can hit this target by the end of the fiscal. So again, end of June. And I think in January, we already hit that target without doing anything special. And I think that's always good. It's a good indication that we've built a product which people like. If you don't truly have to do anything and it will just, the usage keeps on going up, that's a good indication of a well-received product. And that was, of course, before COVID hit and the increased work from home demand. So we saw a pretty steady line of usage going up. And again, in January, we completed our forecast for the full fiscal. And then when COVID hit, we just saw a spike like never before. And it scared us. Like, we anticipated growth, but we never anticipated this explosion of usage. So I remember that in Q1 of this calendar year, so the first quarter, the usage was 3x, just out of nowhere. And that only included 1 month of COVID and the whole increased work from home scenarios. So I don't know about the second quarter, but what I do remember is that in specific regions, the connections were increased with 10x, especially in Europe, Northern Europe to be exact. So and when I say 10x increase, that was in 1 week. So there was just 1 week where the amount of connections increased by 10x. So you can imagine that since we run this as a service now, and we have to make sure the whole backend infrastructure, that's our care. You know, it's no longer something the customer needs to worry about. So this time, I wouldn't say we panicked, but we definitely had to look at, you know, making sure that we have all of the right resources assigned, that all of our databases can grow to kind of handle all of the connections. And that all worked out. So I think it's a great example on just offloading some of the concerns that normally our customers would have, and Microsoft will now take care of it for you.
Yeah, it's been quite phenomenal to see sort of the growth and the uptake of it. I think I'll say me and I got involved with it quite early on as well, and yeah, we see the demand from the customers is just insane, and I hope it continues that way. I think a big majority of that is because the product seems to be driven from the feedback that you get from the customers, which is, I know you've got the global back belts out there doing their job, working with the customers, but for me, that's been the most impressive thing to see.
Oh, that's great to hear. Yeah, that's good to hear. We try to listen, for sure. We're trying to build a product which kind of matches what you guys and our customers are saying.
Yeah.
So that's good to hear.
You've 100% achieved that, so well done. So can you tell us a bit about the operating system support for WVD?
Yeah, sure. Let me first explain a bit how our teams are structured, and that will help you understand as well on what area of expertise I have, to make sure you don't ask questions which I'm unable to answer. So if you look at how our product team is organized, we have 4 teams, and just to simplify things a little bit, we have one team that's all about the client. So it could be iOS, Windows, Android, HTML5, and that's run by a guy named Sandeep. So that's one team. Then the second team is all about the backend infrastructure. So the gateway, the broker. I sometimes joke that it's team invisible because whatever they develop, whatever they ship, you don't see it. It's all tucked away somewhere in Azure. The only thing you do see is the Azure portal. One of the things we declared GA just last week with the whole spring release, which is now GA, it actually has the Azure portal, which is part of that team as well. So let's imagine you establish a connection. You use one of the clients from Sandeep and his team. You go through the whole management plane, which is run by Clark. Then at some point, you end up on the session host. And everything you see from that point on, so the operating system and the apps, that's part of my team. So that includes things like FS Logics, and in the future, hopefully, it will include things like MSIX App Attach. So that's the third team. And then we also have a fourth team, which is relatively new, and they do specific portions. So it's like they're focusing at monitoring and some other things like reliability and performance, which are kind of, across the board. If you think about reliability, it could be anything. It could be the client, which has to be reliable. It has to be around the backend infrastructure and even the session host like Windows. How do we make sure it's more reliable? So those things are more across the board. That's how our 4 teams are split roughly.
Cool. So those teams are. What is the size of those teams? How many people are in those teams?
Yeah, we're a relatively small team, and by the way, it depends a little on if you define team, because typically we have 3 different roles within engineering. So one is developers, and they, as the name suggests, they develop. So they really work on the code and they create everything. Then we have folks who are, it is very close to development, that we call them DI, data and intelligence, I think it stands for. So they make sure that we have the dashboards and all the information we need to make specific decisions, because that's always very tough. You have a lot of loud customers saying, we need this feature, we need that feature, but actually you need data to back up specific investments. So having that data in a structured way is key. So that's the second part, which is D&I, data and intelligence. And then we have the PMs, the program managers. So that's the teams that I was just describing. Yep. So those are like high level, the 3 different roles. I think in terms of developers, I'd have to guess, but I think we have maybe around 60, maybe 70 developers. So that's a good chunk of developers creating all the magic that we typically talk about. We have, I'm not sure exactly, but maybe 6, 7, or 8 D&I folks. And then we have probably around 20 program managers, PMs, that are divided across the 4 teams that we talked about earlier. So that's, if you sum it up, you're close to 100. So 100 people that every day when they turn on their computer, they're working on WVD.
Yeah.
Yeah, trying to make things better, trying to ship new products. That's roughly the division.
That's quite impressive. So obviously now that Spring's been released, do you expect those people to stay in place? Are they like the core team that will continue to evolve WVD?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we're growing. If you look at how the service is growing, you kind of have to ramp up or extend the amount of people that work on WVD as well. So for sure, that will remain. And we have a healthy backlog of feature requests to kind of justify the work for the next coming years. So I don't expect that to go down anytime soon.
So what you're telling us, that it's going to get better and better and better.
Hopefully, yeah, we're
Good.
Doing our best.
So, well, when we're talking about that backlog, what is the top 3 most requested features right now after the Spring release, after the GA?
Yeah, that's a good question.
No, I will just give you one hint. It says something to do with single sign-on.
Yeah, single sign-on. Yeah,
I think that's one of the most requested ones.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we can talk about that one for a little. I think if we go back in time just a couple of months, number 1 was for sure the Azure portal. As you know, you could deploy WVD, but you quickly had to go into PowerShell,
yep.
Which is great for some customers, but not so great for others who say, well, we just want to have a portal, we want to click around, and if we want to add a session host, we don't want to dive into PowerShell again. So that's one of the things we worked on. The second thing is probably support for Azure AD Join VMs. As you know right now, if you use WVD, if you subscribe to the feed where you get all your apps and desktops, that's using Azure AD identities, which is awesome. We can just turn on conditional access and multi-factor authentication and all of those good things. But then once we establish a connection to the actual session host, you're prompted for AD credentials. And that's, Stefan, that's probably what you mean with single sign-on. Like that's the point where you want to have single sign-on, I assume, right? Yep. That's what you mean? Yeah, because that's another interesting thing. Like if people talk about SSO, what do you mean? Is it SSO to the feed? Is it SSO to the VM? Or is it when you're connected to your session host, do you have single sign-on to like the
other services?
Yeah, some other services. Yeah. So ideally you want to have SSO across the board.
Yeah.
And the most, one of the things we get a lot of feedback about is exactly what you said. Like, how do you make sure you have SSO when you connect to the session host? And I think we have 2 answers there. If you keep on using AD joined VMs, which right now is the only supported option, we are working on making sure you can have a single sign-on there, but it does include ADFS, which is something a lot of people, including me, are not so happy to recommend their customers or deploy.
Yeah, you are just seeing customers moving away from ADFS. So
no, exactly. And that's the trend that we as Microsoft want to follow as well. But as of now, our SSO story for AD joined VMs unfortunately includes ADFS. And we're expecting that feature to light up, I think it's in Q4 of this calendar year. So then, unfortunately with ADFS, you can have single sign-on to AD joined VMs. Then the better path, and that's a little bit further away, is more about the capability to have Azure AD joined VMs. And that just makes life so much better. We see tons of deployments going wrong because, I don't know, there are VNet issues and a VM cannot find the domain controller. I see you guys nodding heads, so this is something you've all hit.
We've all been there.
Same here.
Customer.
Yeah, same here. Or, people use usernames that are blacklisted by Azure, and you see the weirdest things happening. So a lot of the deployments fail just because domain joining in VM brings additional complexity. And of course, it relies on a DC, which has additional costs involved.
Yep.
I don't need a DC or Azure ADDS or something that increases cost. So so that's probably number 2 feature ask is like, when do you guys ship support for AAD joined VMs? And that's coming. That's a pretty complex item because it involves creating a new protocol. I can talk about this in depth, but I don't know if you guys want me to talk about this in depth. But that's something that's coming next calendar year. And once we ship that, it will be in 2 milestones. And the second milestone will actually deliver single sign-on. So that means that if you have an Azure AD joined VM, you can have single sign-on across the board to the feed, to the VM, and once you're connected inside of the VM.
Because you are signed in with your Azure AD credentials.
Exactly,
Yep.
exactly, yeah. So that's something which is coming next calendar year. It's a significant investment from us because it requires changes to WVD, it requires changes to Windows, and it requires a completely new protocol, including an Azure service where you actually communicate to or authenticate to. And it's not just creating a new protocol and creating a service that kind of establish that or helps to make that happen is a significant ask. And something that we've aligned on with multiple teams within Microsoft. We're creating designs, etc. But it's just a lot of work, and that's why it takes a little longer.
Yeah, and it's not all between the WVD team. You have to work together with the Azure AD team, the Azure team, the network team, all the other teams before you even get the designs to get started with this idea.
No, exactly. Just getting the idea and getting alignment on priority, because everyone has tons of things to do. WVD is not the only team who has feature requests to Azure.
It's not their priority, probably.
Yeah, exactly. So you have to make sure that everyone's aligned across the board. And so you can almost see it, even though you see one big Microsoft, within it, you could define multiple mini organizations, and everyone has their own agenda, everyone has their own priorities, and that needs to be aligned, which takes a little bit of time. That's just the overhead of doing things at scale in a large organization like Microsoft.
So I don't know about you guys, but I don't know if you got any questions, but otherwise we can just talk about the Azure AD Join because I find it very interesting. And also because with the Azure AD Join options, well, you probably also get the Intune support of your WVD session host.
Well, that's an interesting thing you bring up because a lot of customers and IT professionals and partners, they say, when are you going to ship Azure AD support? But really what they're asking is something much more complex. Because if we would just ship Azure AD support, they would say, but what about Intune?
Yep.
And we can say, no, you asked for Azure AD support. You never said Intune.
No, yep.
And then when we ship Intune, they say, okay, but when can we store our FS Logix profiles on Azure Files? And we can say, well, you never asked that. You only said Azure AD and Intune. So, what about, where is this coming from? So once you start asking a little bit more about Azure AD support, you're absolutely right. It's AAD and Intune, FS Logix with the profiles being able to store it on Azure Files. Is there more? I think that's the gist of it. So there's more dependencies before we can light up what customers actually want. If we go back to your comment to Intune, what we're hoping to ship later this calendar year, it's not 100% sure yet, but is to have Intune support for Win10 multi-session. And that's not in an Azure AD join state yet, but just AD join. So AD with Intune.
Yeah, like the hybrid join or...
Yeah, exactly. Hybrid and then with Intune. So that already allows, some customers to move away.
Configurations to...
That's it. Yeah. They can modernize their whole management platform. So that's one way. And then as soon as we introduce Azure AD support, they can also change the way, the trust or domain join state of a VM. And then you're, in a much better position.
Because surely you must have some customers now who, if I'm a new company today, I'm completely greenfield environment, and I kind of configure my new environment with Azure AD, Intune, all that kind of stuff. And then someone says, oh, let's deploy WVD. And then, oh, you need to do this. They're going to be like, what the hell is this? So yeah, it's certainly makes sense to try to make it 100% cloud environment, which you can't do today, right?
No, absolutely. It was just all about prioritization. When we list out all of the things we wanted to do, and it was just a way bigger demand for AD joined VMs. And that's why we shipped support for AD joined VMs first, and now we're looking into Azure AD joined VMs. But you're absolutely right. And that's why I think it's feature OS #1 right now that we ship the portal. It's exactly for the reasons you stated. They want to have a modernized cloud-only deployment, which requires Azure AD.
Yeah, and not your own domain controller.
Yeah, maybe I have a question regarding this, Peter. When we talk about the Azure AD Join, especially, and you are working on it, will you most likely focus on the Windows 10 multi-session image? Because I can imagine that when we're talking about all compatible operating systems, that there are probably some problems in developing this and planning to make this feasible.
Yeah, definitely. Like if we look at the statistics, which operating systems are deployed the most, #1 by far is Win 10 Enterprise Multi-Session. As a matter of fact, I think that around 90% of all the VMs that are being deployed are running Win 10 Multi-Session. Then it's about 6, 7, or 8% is just Windows 10 Enterprise. And the few percentage that we have left is everything else combined. Windows 7 and Windows Server 2012 R2, 2016, 2019. So apparently a lot of our customers, they like Win 10 Enterprise Multi-Session. So that's definitely where our #1 priority is going to. Just, we want to meet the customers where they're at, which is Win 10 Enterprise Multi-Session. So for sure. But we're also want to make sure that we don't leave Win 10 Enterprise behind, so that support will always come together. Sometimes Win 10 Enterprise might go sooner because it's somewhat easier. But yeah, it's always the highest priority is multi-session.
Perfect.
So what's the, obviously we think about all these technologies. So when you put it all together, what are we trying to get to? What's the end goal, effectively?
The end goal of WVD?
I think personally it goes far beyond WVD, doesn't it? Because obviously it's all about the user experience, and you kind of detaching applications, operating systems, all these things.
Yeah.
Where are we trying to get to? See, Microsoft must have a big vision, right, about where they want to go with all this.
Yeah, sure. I think there's a few stories there. If you just look at the OS and apps, I think what we're going to want to go to is a more modular way of deploying virtualized workloads. So ideally, you want to have everything separated. It's like a layered cake. So let's imagine we can just deploy the operating system. And then on top of that, we can use FS logics to kind of roam around the profile, which is also separated. So you could see it as a modular item. And then on top of that, we can just layer applications using MSIX app attach. And then if we have another way, which by the way, we're also working on making sure that all the settings are just deployed quickly and reliable, then we're in a pretty good state where if it's Patch Tuesday, you can just remove the operating system layer. You just grab the latest gallery image, which is always updated with all of the security patches from a given month. And then you can just layer everything on top of it. I think that would give us a much more reliable and cheaper way of deploying virtualized workloads. And as a matter of fact, I had to get used to it. So when I got into this whole virtualization world, a lot of people said, you have to build, an imaging solution. And that's something I had to get used to. I mean, wait a minute, are we still building images here? I remember when I focused at just regular endpoints, not in a virtualized space, we were trying to get rid of imaging because I visited so many customers that, had, 3, 4 FTE, managing dozens of images. spending weeks, months to get that great golden image that everyone approved and everyone signed off on. And then the next thing what they would do is they order new devices that would come with a fresh installation of Windows 10. And the first thing they would do is wipe that away to deploy that image, which took them months to create. You know, that's super inefficient. So on the physical endpoints, we worked on technology like autopilot, which allows us to reuse that existing image which is on the machine and just install all of the stuff that you need. And then when I moved to virtualization, everyone was back to the imaging piece again. So I had to get used to that for a little while. So I'm not saying we're not doing imaging, because right now in WVD, we don't have a great story on how to create your images. It's something we're working on making that better. But separately, I think our vision is more to go into that layered cake approach, where ideally you don't care about the image. You just grab the latest from the gallery and off you go. I hope that answers your question a little.
Yeah. And we're nearly there, right? We're not that far away from all that. So
we're getting there.
Getting there. It's good to see.
So I think I have, for myself, I think I have maybe two questions. So first thing, I think there is some news about the ARAM templates being used. I think today it is released, or tomorrow.
I'm not sure which, probably you're referring to a post from Stefan.
Yeah, the updated ones. It is today, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's today. I think you're right. So I think he posted an update where you can use the new templates, which also support Windows 10 version 2004.
Yeah.
So that should all be working now. And there's two ways, as you know, there's two ways of deploying WVD. You either use the Spring update with all the ARM templates there, or you go into the Azure portal and you go to Provision Host Pool, which is using I think you guys call it the fall release technology.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure what we call it. I think it's something called like Classic, or I don't know. Anyway, both of those can be used to deploy Windows 10 version 2004 now.
And I think I saw a post about some Windows 10 update being released, which makes sure the AppX packages are being loaded correctly.
Yeah, that's right. A couple of months ago, we identified an issue. If you're using Windows 10 2004, together with FS Logics, whenever you would log in as an end user, all the AppX packages, so we have AppX packages that you can find in your start menu, just, I don't know, I'm looking at my start menu right now to see if I spot one. Calculator is an AppX package, to give you a random example. But there are also system components that are wrapped as a AppX package, like shell or the start menu or some other things. So together, that's a bunch of AppX packages, and registering those takes a big hit on the CPU and on the disk. So we want to make sure we register those packages only if it's really needed. And on a single session device, if you just have a PC with Windows 10 Enterprise, you register once, you do it whenever the device is idle and nobody cares about it. But on a multi-session VM, maybe it's never idle because it's always in use by someone. And during logon, if we want to register those system components, which always have to be registered, otherwise you won't be able to see the desktop because the shell simply doesn't start. If a lot of people are doing that at the same time, it will just saturate the amount of CPU and disk, and the whole user density will go down the drain, which is, well, not a good story. Yep. So then we identified a bug, which again on Windows 10 2004 together with FS Logics, would just re-register all of the AppX packages for every user, which is horrible from a performance perspective. So we fixed the issue. Well, actually the AppX team fixed the issue, and then we pushed it through our servicing channels. And that takes a little while. I mean, you service not just one device, but you service all Windows 10 devices out there. So there's a little process attached to it, as you can imagine. And then in July, this actually hit Windows Update. So if you're running Windows 2004 with FSLogix, make sure you install all of the Windows updates because the performance will be a lot better.
So after the July update.
That's correct. Yes.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know that it was
Neither.
that. But are you deploying 2004, Neil?
No, not
It's still
yet.
1909, I think.
Yeah, so I was working on a customer project a few weeks ago, and they talked about 2004, and I advised them not to because I knew there were still a few bugs knocking about. But if they're fixed now, then maybe we can go ahead.
We can just create a new image.
Let's create a new image. So one thing which I hear most often when I speak to customers is, okay, I'm going to migrate all my desktops into WVD. Obviously, due to an on-prem environment, they're completely in control of that environment, right? So now a few months ago, I was doing a proof of concept with a customer, and they were a very needy customer, and they basically they wanted the project, and WV went down. Now we were on the spring release, so that's perfectly okay. So obviously, what are you doing as a service to make the WVD service more reliable? Because obviously, if I'm a customer and I'm putting 20,000 desktops into WVD, that's my whole business that I've got in there. And if that business goes down, I'm stopped working. So how is WVD getting better from a reliability point of view? I know you've got your regions that you're going out to, and I know that you've got your metadata going out to the rest of the regions as well. So what's going on in the background that you can talk about around reliability and performance?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think parts of it is also on Team Invisible that we talked about.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if I'm, the most qualified person to talk about this. I could tell you from an operating system perspective what we're doing to enhance the reliability. From the backend service, which is what I think you're referring to most, I only observe it from a little distance. So what I'm seeing is that we have processes in place that if an issue arises, of course, it gets a specific priority. If the priority is high enough, we automatically have an incident manager who starts looking into what the issue is. We make sure that customers are informed. So we send out an Azure comms is what we call it. So that means that you can find in the Azure portal, there's a section where you can find information. And we can actually target specific customers. So if we know that customers in a specific region are impacted, we can send an alert to those by saying, hey, there's an issue, we're working on it. Then at the same time, we have this incident will loop in specific developers that can help mitigate the issue, because that, of course, is the number one thing we want to do as soon as possible. Now, what exactly that means, what kind of issues we've been seeing, and what kind of steps they normally take to mitigate the issues, I'm not 100% qualified to answer that question because I'm not in the team. But I do know that reliability is our number one priority. Number one. Even in February, we decided not to ship or not to focus at any new features because we just want to focus on reliability. That's the number one key thing that everyone cares about. And if features are slipping with a month or even more, people will understand if quality is bringing up to a higher level. So hopefully, I'm not sure what kind of downtime you were looking at, but hopefully it was nothing too bad. And hopefully we can do better in the future. That's our goal.
Good.
Perfect. Peter, can you tell us a little bit also about the collaboration with Citrix and VMware? We had a lot of news in the past because we have customers, of course, that still use Citrix Cloud or want to benefit from the Citrix offerings on Azure. How can a customer that comes with Citrix actually benefit from the Windows 10 multi-session image? Or is there maybe more to know about?
Yeah, it's a good question, Patrick. We get a similar question quite often. For us, it's important to make sure that customers can use technology like Win10 multi-session. And we've talked with Citrix and VMware in the past, and what we've done is we have let's say an agreement that they have WVD specific offerings, which runs on Azure. And that means that if a customer, like you mentioned, if a customer already invested in Citrix knowledge or tools and their people are trained in the tool set, they can leverage those existing investments. So they can sign up for Citrix with their WVD offering. And again, it means it will run on Azure, but they have specific capabilities that kind of extend the capabilities of what WVD native offers. So I'll give you an example, and it's probably the biggest one, is that they offer hybrid support. So if you have existing workloads running on-prem, like maybe Win10 or some Windows Server workload, you can integrate those into their management plane. So you have workloads that can both run on-prem and can run in Azure in one management console. While WVD native only offers Azure only. Everything's in Azure. There's no on-prem component whatsoever. The other thing is that both Citrix and VMware, with their WVD offering, get access to Win10 multi-session. And like we discussed earlier, it's one of the key reasons why people use WVD. It has a couple of advantages. Mostly, I think the number one is it doesn't require an RDSCal, so it's cheaper. Mm-hmm. The vast majority of our customers, they already have Windows E3 per user or something that kind of rolls up to that bundle. And so that means you're covered. You no longer require an additional license. So yeah, that's what Citrix and VMware can do as well. Of course, they charge an additional fee, but they also offer more capabilities. So if a customer is looking for one of those added benefits, then what we've seen is that they typically look at the offerings, and that sometimes they look at WVD native, but if there's a specific feature that we're missing, but Citrix or VMware offers, they should totally go for those offerings. And from our perspective, both is fine. You know, we have great relationship with both Citrix and VMware, so we're happy to support whether you go left or right.
Mm-hmm. It's quite interesting because I've come from a Citrix background. I did Citrix very heavily for about 10 years. It's all I did was Citrix. And I have a lot of conversations with customers around the whole Citrix versus, it's not a versus WD thing, it's obviously they're both separate products. But what I find interesting is all the WVD deployments which I've done so far have been migrations from Citrix onto WVD, which is, I hear that a lot. But as you said, customers have their own unique case scenarios where those products fit into those. So I'm hoping that the partnership with Citrix will continue to grow, because both products can work very, very nicely together.
Yeah, we hear all kinds of scenarios. Yeah, we have customers migrating to all kinds of flavors. And, you know, for us, it doesn't really matter as long as the customer just has a good solution, which fits their needs, then we're happy. You know, that's the main thing we're trying to take care of.
Absolutely.
So how was it for you? You know, I know you guys are asking the questions here, but I'm also curious, how was it for you if you have a Citrix background to all of a sudden start deploying WVD native solutions? How was that transition?
Well, I think the biggest difference in setting up those environments is the ease of way of deploying those. So in the past with Citrix, you had your delivery controller, you had your storefront service, you had your NetScalers. You all had to implement those double. So with WVD, it's just a matter of, well, taking care of your own hosts, of your own image, your own applications. And you don't need to think about the gateway, the load balancing. All those services are now being taken away from your administrative teams. And you can focus on like the user experience, your application landscape, your updating your images, updating your VDI hosts. So I think well, that's the biggest difference between those Citrix solutions. Well, not Citrix Cloud at the moment, because that's the same. They also got the gateway and stuff. But with deploying like a traditional RDSH environment or deploying a Citrix environment, there are a lot less moving components which you need to take care of, which you need to manage. So
Exactly.
that's the biggest benefit of using WVD, for sure.
Yeah, for me, it's also simplicity and performance. Citrix projects I used to work on, you're talking 3 to 6 months minimum to get everything up and running. Projects that I've been working on recently, 3 weeks to do the same thing, and it's simpler, and it's quicker, and it costs less.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, you can just get started with right away the workspace for those users. You don't have to design a lot of things to get your proof of concept up and running.
Yep.
And you need to do less than that to get your proof of concept environment to like a production ready to use environment.
Yeah, but don't forget about the geographical advantages you have as well, because I come more from an architectural background. So what I have to take care of most likely is when a customer, which is quite international with multiple data centers, or even that needs to separate this within Europe, that you can deploy your workloads wherever you want actually. This was one of the biggest advantages as well when you think of the hardware you need to order, the hardware you need to install. So you need much more resources to deploy, to be able to deploy a VDI environment at least. Right now it works in a bunch of just a click and you're ready to go actually, especially when you work with automation and automated deployments actually.
Yeah, that's good to hear. It's interesting because I remember when we had RDMI, remote desktop modern infrastructure, which is something we didn't ship, but it kind of formed the basis of WVD. So it was very similar where you had the management plane, which was were just web applications hosted in your own subscription. So as a customer, you would bring your Azure subscription, you would install these web apps, and that would allow you to kind of tunnel or kind of direct all of your RDP traffic. And I remember when we had discussions with customers, they said, it's great. We love the fact that we now have web applications instead of domain joined, VMs, gateway broker that are exposed directly to the internet with all kinds of security concerns. They loved that part. But then they said, why are we managing this crap? Why don't you do it for us? We don't want to have all of this stuff running. Why don't you offer it as a service? And that feedback from customers made us kind of move it into, here's the bits, go deploy it in your own subscription, and don't call us, good luck. I'm exaggerating a little bit. You can call us anytime, but you get the idea. But anyway, so then we moved it into the Microsoft subscription, and we had to change our whole mindset, because then all of a sudden we're running as a service, which is a huge change, because now we're responsible for making sure that everything scales up and down, making sure that Neil is not down. So it was a big shift, but it's all based on customer feedback. And it's the number one thing we're trying to do right is listen to everyone, having conversations like this, focus on the things that matter. So anyway, it's good to hear your transition to, not transition, but your experience with WVD, and it sounds like it's so far you're having a lot of fun and good experience. I'm glad to hear.
Well, that's for sure. I think we all had a lot of fun with WVD.
Certainly have, and I think the biggest thing for me, and the reason why I love WVD so much, is it fits so nicely into the Azure ecosystem, and it grows along with the Azure ecosystem. As Azure gets better, WVD will get better, the storage will get better, the networking will get better, the compute will get better, the image management will get better. Everything will just automatically continue to get better. And if you've got 100 developers working every day to make that better as well, then I think it has an amazing future ahead of it. So that's why I personally feel so excited. So we want to sort of thank you for making a truly awesome product, and we're looking forward to see what it can become.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you guys.
Yeah, it was like a kind of a backstage tour around
It was.
the WVD product from Microsoft,
Yeah.
right, guys?
That's great to hear. You know, we can for sure in the future do it again. There's much more to see during the tour.
I could speak to you all night long.
Well, there are 4 product manager and 4 product pillars.
Yeah.
We are just the first one.
Yeah,
One
you're
down.
number one. We'll
Way to go.
We're just going to invite the rest of it.
You should. I'll introduce you.
Yeah,
definitely. That'd be good.
that sounds like a plan.
Yeah.
Peter,
Cool.
thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
I think I can hear your stomach rumbling.
You need to
I can
get
eat
some-
tomorrow. It's okay.
Well, thank you and have a great day, Peter.
Yeah, thank you guys. Talk to you soon.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.